friends, Jerry Rosa here at the Rosa String Works Workshop. That once famous baseball player, Yogi Berra, who had all the wonderful sayings, deja vu all over again. I'd say that's kind of what we're dealing with here. Oh, did you see chocolate? You want to see it again? Well, take a look down here on my table. Yeah. Why two necks? Why two tops? Because he thought I might need spares. Oh my gosh, what a mess. This is a real wreck. Let me tell you the story on this. You can see there's just parts laying everywhere. There's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 bags included with parts in them. Loose parts laying around everywhere, as you can see here. The parts that are original are broken pretty good and malformed, I guess I'd say, or deformed or something, because they're not exactly the normal shape. And it's just going to be a lot of fun, I can tell you. So let me bring the camera back up here and we'll talk for a minute about what this is. Well, this Fiddle package came from a fellow by the name of Brent Small. And Brent saw some of my earlier videos where I repaired some other violins, like the Tennessee violin, I think it was. I called it the Tennessee Stradivari. And that was kind of a weird title because there would be no such thing as a Tennessee Stradivari violin, you understand, which just means that 99.99999% of all Stradivari violins are copies. All of them. You know, people come to me all the time and say, oh, I've got a Stradivari, it's handed down through the family, you know, and I look at it and I go, well, I'm sorry to tell you that's not an original Stradivari violin, you know. Such is the case here as well, by the way. But this fellow saw, you know, that I had repaired these violins. Now, this was before chocolate, by the way, so him sending this to me was not inspired by chocolate. And he just, you know, said that he was a fan of the channel. He saw the work and felt like I would be the guy to repair his granddad's fiddle. And this was sent back in May. So that'll give you some idea how long ago. It is presently October and the end of October to boot. He tells the story that his grandfather was a triplet. He weighed 2.5 pounds, 2.5 pounds at birth. His grandfather's name was Floyd. His next little brother was Flores, and then Felmer. So they all three had F as their first initial on their names. And they weighed 2.5, 2 pounds, and 1.5 pounds at birth. They were kept in a bread warmer in an old wood stove. Sounds just like the Ozarks to me. They were given coffee and breast milk and whiskey by dropper for the first several months of life. I love the whiskey part. And obviously it must have worked because they said they drank coffee and whiskey for the rest of the days of their lives. Oh my goodness. Such are the stories. But, you know, I guess I'm a sucker for fixing old grandpa's old fiddles. And the sad truth is he sent this to another shop and he said they only made it worse. He paid him $100 to kind of sort of get it glued up where he could hang it on the wall. It all fell apart again, and that's the name of that tune. Well, at the risk of sounding cocky, I don't think that's going to happen again. I'm pretty sure we'll get it back in playable condition, not just a wall hanger. he sent a lot of donor parts because, you know, he just felt, I guess, number one, he hadn't seen chocolate, so he didn't realize I could fix most of the parts. Now, I will admit the donor parts are tempting to use. Like this is the top. This top is in almost perfect condition. This top, not so much. Now, this is the original top. This top is kind of flattened out and underbowed, and it's cracked through here. You can see a lot of cracks, and the braces are broken out and things like that. But this is the original top. Now, you've heard me say many times, the top is 80% of your sound, and it really truly is. If this were my grandfather's violin, I wouldn't hear of putting a different top on it. I would want the original top. So that's my plan at the moment. We're going to just try to keep it as original as we can. He did send a lot of other parts. Now, in this particular case, he has donor written on here, but I thought he told me, no, this has to be the donor, because he said the original had the mechanical tuning keys on it, and I can tell this one had mechanical tuning keys on it, and this is the original. Now, the original is actually in better shape than the donor one. The donor one he sent, I don't know why he sent it, it's cracked all through here and broke, so I see no reason to use that. The original actually looks much better to me. Of course, I haven't studied any of this in detail yet. You understand, I'm taking it out of the box and package as I'm making this video. So I haven't had a chance to review or look through all this stuff yet. I think he has written which pieces are donor pieces. Well, this bag says donor parts. So, you know, as much as possible, we're not going to go into the donor bin any more than we have to. These are all just have question marks on them. He doesn't know whether these are original parts or donor parts or whatever. So anyway, for my 2 cents worth, as much as possible, we're going to try to keep it as original as possible. I'm a glutton for punishment. Here we go. Well, my friends, so that this won't be too intimidating, I'm going to set this set of parts off to the side. We'll start with the simple and most important part, the top, first. First thing is just to repair the damage to the top that I can see, and as much of the damage as we can. And even before that, I'm going to scrape some of this junk off on the inside because it just looks like it's kind of messed up. There's a lot of hide glue squeeze out all through here. I don't know why there's so much of that, but there's just a lot of it right on the seam. And I just want all of the squeeze out extra glue gone before I start putting clamps and everything, and that way I can tell what's solid and what's not. I want to get it down to bare wood and clean before we start in restoration. The brace is the old hide glue brace is coming glued through here too. Once again, for the classically trained violin restorers, you should turn off the video now, because I don't use classically trained violin techniques, at least not all that much. I know about most of the techniques, but I use techniques that I think either work better or make more sense. And if that doesn't set with you, you best look away now. I think these tools were given to me by Chuck. You know, I'm just using them as a scraper. I think he used them to pry things apart, and we might use them for that too down the road. I'm not exactly sure how he used them. He had several of these in different sizes. This particular one works as a scraper really well space that's really small, confined, like this is a very narrow channel through here, and this fits in the channel really well. A lot of glue overage on this old fiddle top. I don't like to see that. All that extra squeeze out just, you know, is just extra, I call it decoration, and you don't need much decoration on a fiddle. In fact, you don't want much decoration on a fiddle. You just want it to be kind of plain. But this round through here is a good example how thick the glue is, and you know, there's no reason for all that. Whoever applied the glue originally was definitely very liberal with their glue. I'm much more stingy with my glue. The customer that owns this was also told that the violin was beyond repair by another shop and that it would cost way more than it's worth to repair it. And even though he said he knew that and he just wanted it repaired anyway, that because of the sentimental value, he wants it back in plain condition. Well, I think I've got it in fairly good shape, although I'm still hitting pockets of glue here and there. That's one thing about the hide glue, it doesn't grip all that great a lot of times, and you can just chip it off fairly quickly. But that's why it comes apart too. And that's why I say that folks that were classically trained love to use that stuff, because it's job security. They know they're going to get the instrument back to repair it eventually. When I glue it back with tight bond, you can still take it apart just as easy as you can take apart hide glue. In some cases easier, and but it won't come apart so easy in terms of just falling apart, because it dries out and gets brittle. And that's usually the thing that sends the classically trained people through the roof, that it has to be hide glue, even though Stradivari, if he were alive today, being such an innovator that he was, would be using better glue. I'm positive. They don't see it that way, but I sure as heck do. The man was a genius, and most geniuses use the best materials they can find. There you go. That's pretty clean. That's the cleanest that's probably been in 100 years. Assuming it's 100 years old even, and I don't know that. I would say it's got to be pretty close to that though. Just looking at the fiddle here, if I was guessing the age of it, I'd guess it in the real early 1900s. So we're in the real early 20s now, so I would say that it's bumping 100 years old, if not a little older. This part here is what bothers me the most on the fiddle. The crack itself is not much of a problem, but this side here is real flat and comes up to a point over here on the left side of the seam. Well, left side for me, right side for you. But anyway, this is really flat, and I don't know why it's so flat. I don't know if this brace is going to fit it. It looks like it will. I'm not sure which way the brace was in there. Whether it was in there this way or... Yeah, I think it was in like that, I think. You know, I have seen other fiddles that had tops that weren't symmetrical. This top is definitely not symmetrical. But once again, because it was Granddad's top, I say we should use it, even though it's not in the best shape. That's my opinion, and I'm going to stick to it. So here we go. First thing I'm going to do before I actually put the glue in here is I'm just going to lightly go down through here. This has not been glued, I don't think, so I don't expect there'll be any glue in here, but I'm just going through it just in case there's dirt and dust and grime in here, stuck in here, and I'm just taking the back of the blade and going down through there to clean it out a little bit in case there's anything in the way. And just running it up and down the length of the crack a little bit there just to clean it out. Once again, I'm going to put a little water on the crack. Even though I think I can get glue in here fine, I actually think this will be a good thing. I think it'll make it cure a little slower, make the glue flow a little bit better. I don't think it hurts anything to wet the wood down just a little bit sometimes before you glue it. You don't want to soak it down, but dampening it a little bit doesn't seem to hurt anything. And I do think it makes the glue flow in a little bit better and get into the little micro places and things. So here we go. This is Titebond Original glue. And as I've said many times, you can take this apart just as easily as you can take apart hide glue. And of course, the traditional people do not believe that and won't agree to it and just think I'm doing sinful things here. But they'll just have to keep thinking that, because I'm not going to change for them or anybody else. Alright, I've got her glued up well. It seems to meet up pretty well. Squeezing it back and forth just to make sure the glue gets moved around a lot. I'm going to wipe off the excess before I get the clamps on there. There'll be more come out in a minute. I'm going to use 2 clamps primarily. At least that's the plan at the moment. You know how my plans change. This clamp is just one I made. It's kind of a standard looking violin clamp. And right away you can see it's squeezing out the glue, so it's pulling it together really well. I think it'll keep it good and flat. It looks like we're going to need more than that one clamp. Yeah, that's doing it. That's bringing it together really nicely. That's like near perfect there. Now I'm going to also put this end clamp on it down here to pull the 2 ends pieces together. The difference with that is I've got to put some leather on this, since the leather that came with it is long gone. Clamp one side down with the leather first, get the other side lined up, clamp that side down. The advantage of this clamp is it keeps this fairly flat, and then you can screw this together right here and tighten it together. And that squeezed out some more, and we'll tighten that a little bit, tighten that a little bit more, and that's about as good as you can do with something like this. It's just about perfectly level. There's a little bit of unevenness there in a place or two. I'm not exactly sure how we could fix that because it's pretty warped up. If you look on the inside there, you really can't even tell where the crack was. It went right down through this middle thing. So it's pretty good. I wish it was a little better on the outside than it is. I think maybe I can see how I can make it a little better. Seems as I press it down right in the center there, it seems to get a little bit better. I have 2 layers of thick plastic under here, spanning that crack, and I'll put 1 layer of plastic on the top outside here and just tighten it down a little bit, maybe not too crazy tight, but I think, yep, I can see the glue squeezing out already. That's really working. That's working a lot. That'll help. Anything to get the crack to close up better. It just wasn't closing up on the top, it's just kind of kinked. It was closed up fine on the inside, but not on the outside. Now that's working good. Okay, We will now set that aside, let it do its thing, and then we'll come back and put some cleats on that. And we'll also get that other brace glued in there later. Okay, so that little mild catastrophe is fixed. Now we have to turn our attention to the more major catastrophe. And this is quite a mess. It's hard to tell which one of these went where. Oh, I think I can figure it out. I believe that's how it went. I believe this one went here, based on what I can see. And then these two pieces, I've already monkeyed with them a little bit, and I can tell they went together like so. So these two pieces are just broke right down across the middle there. I don't know what caused that, but that's how they go together. And then this gets turned this way and goes right here. Now there is no, well, yeah, here it is. This is the internal rib here, and the rest of the pieces are just little pieces, I think, that make up the rest of this. Okay, the problem is trying to get these things back in their original location. This is loose all the way around, and it can go in a lot of places. So you want to try to get it back to the original place as close as you can, because that's what will make everything fit together better. It looks like I can see how that was. Again, we got a lot of glue squeezed out all over the place. Whew. I think just off camera I'm going to go around just cleaning this joint under here, and then we're going to come back and show clamping this all down and getting it locked into place. By the way, we haven't really named this violin yet, and I think I'm just going to call it Trip, as in triplet. Since he was one of 3 boys that back in that day were probably very lucky to survive as to grown men, and they did. I would say that was a pretty rare thing back then. So we'll just call this violin Trip, short for triplet. It's going to be a real trip just putting it back together. So I think I've got that fairly cleaned out. I don't really see much glue or anything else in the way anyway. And doesn't seem to be much going to get in my way, so I guess I'll get the clamps and the glue and we'll get started putting it back together. So I'm going to start up here as far up in there as I can go. We'll get glue in the tail block area. In fact, I'm probably just going to have to put it all the way around here because it's not going to lift up once I get this started going back into place. Okay, so how do we get it back in place? And I guess the only answer I've got is you start at the fixed end and work to the other end. That looks like that's about where it used to be, so that's where it's going. I see no sign of lining in this violin, which is not a good thing. You know, I don't know how it ever stayed together. Just this little tiny thin edge is just not enough to glue to. And almost all violins and almost all stringed instruments, acoustic that is, have lining around the edges. On a guitar, I refer to it as kerf. But on violins, we call it lining because it's just a thin strip of wood, no kerfing cut into it at all. But I think I'm going to put some lining in this because I don't want a call a year from now going, hey, it came back apart, you know. Pretty sure when we get it done, it'll last 50 to 100 years. So I'll do some cleanup here and I'll show you what it looks like there. Well, my friends, I've got this all glued up and I'm going to set it aside and let it dry. I was looking at the label up close and I noticed it said Columbus, Ohio. Dang the luck, I was holding out for it to be a real Stradivari. I knew it wasn't. Anyway, I could read something, Dan Violin Company, D-A-N Violin Company, Columbus, Ohio. So I Googled that and it turns out it's the Jackson Gulden, G-U-L-D-A-N Violin Company. And when the Google voice read it back to me, they said they built violins, fiddles, and guitars. I thought, violins and fiddles? Wow, that's pretty cool. Since they really are the very same instrument, you understand. I'm going to go ahead and now, while that's drying, turn my attention to the neck. I've already checked the neck block. It seems to be the original that fits this neck just fine. And so I'm going to go ahead and, just to save time and money for the customer, I'm going to go ahead and get this fretboard glued up. You know, it's not a high-end fretboard. In fact, we could do a much better fretboard. But on the other hand, this was the original fretboard with the fiddle. And as I've said before, for my money, I'd keep it original and keep it just like when Grandpa owned it. And it'll be fine, it'll play okay. It could be a higher grade, you know, fingerboard, but this one will be fine. So that's what we're going to use. Anytime you glue two flat surfaces together, they float and skate, and it is almost impossible to keep them aligned. Yes, I know about the salt trick. I don't use salt on my glue joints. But I do use the pin method, and the pin method, you know, it's a little bit time consuming, not too bad though. You just drive a pin in just a little ways in. It doesn't have to be very deep. That's only going in a very short distance. Then you just take your side cutters, preferably a pair of side cutters that have the little groove in it so that it leaves a little bit of a nub. And I'm cutting it off flat there, which leaves a little nub there. It's a little sharp point. And then I'll put in another one back here toward the back. In fact, I think I will just put it back here at the back. Drive it in just a little ways, doesn't have to be very deep. In fact, you don't want to go very deep because you could split the wood. And now I have the two little pins there. Now the trick is to align this thing very close to where you want it to be. Get it as aligned as you can possibly get it. And then you tap it with a hammer. In this case, I'll tap it with a rubber hammer. Now the problem is, as luck would have it, there's a tear out right where that nail was. So that didn't work on the back end. It worked fine on the upper end up here, but it didn't work back here at the back. So I'm going to have to set the nail off to the side. So I'll have to get another little nail there and do this one over. I'll take this piece out because it serves no purpose, and so I'll take that little piece out and then we'll move it over and put it in a spot that does make contact. I just use these little fret pullers to pull the little short piece of nail out of there, and as you can see, that's how short the nail is. It's very short. So I'm holding it with this, and I'll just drive it in over here on the side, which doesn't really matter where it's at, it's just that it has to make contact. There, that should be good. I think that'll work. Now I'll tap it here, and that should do it. Now, generally when you do this, you want to drill a little tiny hole there. This wood is kind of soft. This is not real hard ebony, so I'm not even going to bother with that. I did notice, I thought he told me there was a crack in this neck, and sure enough, I do see it now. I didn't see it before. It's a very, very fine crack. So before now I glue this on, I am actually going to get glue in this crack here, and it's a minute crack. It's not anything to be too concerned about. I don't think it would create any problems down the road, but I do want to fix it. The trick of that is, how do you get glue in that, because it's a really tight crack. Once again, I'm going to use the water method. It's a very, very, very tight crack, so it's not, you know, even trying to blow air down in there, it's not going to do much. You're not going to be able to get a needle down in there. It's like a hairline crack, seriously. I don't know if you can even see it or not, but it is a very small hairline crack. Very tiny. But I can see the water has worked its way in there, and now I will work the glue into it, probably with my fingers and just a glue bottle. And I'm just working the crack open, forcing the glue down in there with my fingers, thumb. You know, it's probably not the best, but I think it'll be fine. You can probably see the little glue squeezing out there on the sides. I don't think it's going to be a problem. And that once it's glued with the fretboard here too, that should take out any additional concern or problem. I think it should hold it just fine. And I don't want very much glue on this, but I want real good coverage, so I'm going to go ahead and cover both pieces and just keep the glue as thin as I can keep it. Okay, I'm going to wipe off any extra glue I can get off of it, because both surfaces have glue on them. And now they're fitting into that little thing I've lined up there, so it should just be fine. And now we'll get the clamps on it and see how it works. Well, there's what she looks like all glued up, and we'll let that sit and do its thing overnight. I'm going to look and see if I can find anything else I can work on yet today, and I think I have one more piece, and that will be this piece right here. We'll glue this back together. That's going to be a tricky little glue up because there's nothing to really reference it to. It might be better if I glued it up once it was on the violin, but what would be the fun in that? I think I'll just go ahead and try to find a way to hold it and get the ends glued back together so it'll be a little easier to line the whole thing up on the violin. I think I can get it together and keep the curve in the right orientation there. At least I think I can. We'll see. I think I've decided to go ahead and use the back as my form. I think that's the only way it's really going to make sense. And I've got it lined up as close to the original as I can tell based on the staining and what I can see.
Battered case, weathered and worn, with the hinges all rusted and the fabric.
I tell you what, it's kind of crazy, but the clamps seem to almost do more harm than good in this particular case. So I think I'm just going to let it sit there. It seems to be kind of stuck on its own, right there where it should be. The joint looks good. And while I'm a big proponent of clamps, something this delicate, sometimes you just can't use them. I'm going to let it go like that. At least give it an hour or so, see how it looks. As usual, I have only let this sit about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But it seems to be fine. It's looks all dry. I don't think I need to worry about the joint holding. But what I want to do is move on to the next step and let that set overnight then. And the next step is putting the bass bar back in it. So let's see, the bass bar, now I just have to figure out which way it went. It's got a little bit of a curve to it. It seems to fit the best right like that. No, actually it doesn't. It actually doesn't. That's the way it went like this because of the angle and everything, I can tell. Trying to find the original marks to get it in the same place, and that's pretty close. I think that's going to be fine. I'll scrape the bottom of this off a little bit. Make sure it's clean wood surface. There's some old glue right there. I'm just cleaning off the excess glue off the sides too. There's just a lot of old squeeze out here from previous glue attempts or something. I don't know if it was the original or not, but I would imagine it was. And it goes like that. Matches really pretty well, so I don't see much of a problem.
All torn, but still cradled inside was one old precious thing. It was Grandpa's old.
Well, that went just about as good as it could go, I think. I'm kind of surprised how well the bass bar fit the top. It fit it really well. I thought the top had maybe gotten out of shape, and maybe it has, but the bass bar sure did fit it perfectly. So if it got out of shape, it got out of shape with the bass bar on there. And the bass bar seems to be, you know, fairly straight for the way it's carved and everything. So anyway, bottom line is we're able to save Grandpa's top here. At least I think so. We won't know until we get a little further along to make sure that it's going to work, but I think it's going to work. I can't really see a reason why it wouldn't. And so far we've saved everything that was original to the violin versus using the donor parts. And we'll continue along that vein and see how far we get. My friends, it's the next morning and we're working on the fiddle, and as you can see, we've got several of the parts up in pretty good shape now. We've got the neck up in pretty good shape, the top is in pretty good shape with the brace glued in and everything, and the sides are solid again, except for this one bout. Now, the original bout, Grandpa's bout, if you will, honestly, it would take a lot of work to make it work, and you can see that there's parts missing here in addition. So even if we got it to work, it would be, you know, it would just take a lot more time is all, and it would be broken on the outside. It just so happens, and this couldn't probably happen in a million years ordinarily, just so happens that this donor piece that was sent along seems to fit nearly perfectly. I mean, it needs just the tiniest bit of tweaking, but it fits so near perfect that it's like you couldn't have that happen in a million years. So I say it was meant to be. We're going to go ahead and put this piece in there. It also has a little crack through here, but that's just a minor thing, and parts are there still. So I am going to change direction and use the donor piece right here. I'll put Grandpa's parts in the case and return them to him, so those will be with the fiddle. But other than that, it's pretty much original. So, and like I said, even on this piece, and the color and everything matches. It's like it's just meant to be. So we're gonna do that, and we'll get that clamped in place right now.
Oh, how sweetly it rings. Grandpa's old fiddle played sweet melodies. He played it from his heart for.
I believe that'll hold it together. We'll let that set for several hours. While this is all drying, in order to keep this project moving, I'm going to work on this neck block next and fitting it in here, and to my surprise, it matches up just almost perfect. Again, you know, it's kind of hard to expect that when all these parts were loose and you just glue them back in place, but it really does match up really well. So the only thing I'm going to do is clean off a little bit of crud here, and then I think I'm ready to glue it back.
My grandpa made wrinkled old hands, he held it with love, and I'm
putting a little extra glue on the piece. There's going to be a little more squeeze out than normal, and the only reason is I just want to fill all the voids that might be there, and since I didn't put glue on both surfaces, that helps coat both surfaces really well. So that's looking good. I'm going to get it clamped in place. This clamp has rubber pads on both sides, so it's very good for clamping straight to bare wood. That seems real good. I'm going to just get in there with some tools and clean up the extra glue squeeze out. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished with that part. Well, I got the neck block all glued up and in there, and all the glue cleaned up. You know, it could be a little bit better, but I can also get rid of any extra glue later just by popping it out. But it's in pretty good shape. I don't think we need to worry about it too much. I just noticed there's a little bit of a looseness here on the back from the side, so I'm going to get some glue in there and squeeze that down too. Now I'm going to make lining for the inside of this. It will not be kerfed lining. Kerfed lining is the ones with the lines cut through it to make it bend better. This will just be a very thin, solid strip of wood that will bend and conform to the edges, and I'll make for the bottom and for the top, so that when we glue the top on, it'll have a better surface to glue to instead of just this little tiny thin edge. You know, when they built them like this, they were just cutting corners basically, and it saved them a lot of time and effort and money, I'm sure, to leave the lining out. But since we've got the opportunity to put the lining back in there, we're going to do it, and it'll make it much more solid. My friends, I'm at the thickness sander that I made in order to thin down these strips of spruce. Spruce would be a good lining for the inside of the violin. It's light, it's airy, and it's a tone wood. So anyway, we're going to thin these down, and then I'll cut thin strips out of these. It's easier to thin them down while they're still wide like this, and then cut thin strips out of them, I believe.
Still hearing it laying up in heaven above.
I'm testing the thickness now, and presently it's about 70 thousandths of an inch. That would be about 1 point, I don't know how many millimeters there, roughly 1.4 or something millimeters. I'm going to try to get it down to about 1 millimeter, around 40 thousandths. So I guess that's actually more closer to, it's almost 2 millimeters. So now I think about it. Yeah, so I'm going to take this down to just about 1 millimeter thick, maybe a little bit thicker than that. I might leave it at 50 thousandths. 40 thousandths is about a millimeter. So that'll give you some idea.
The most honest man that I ever have seen, and his time on this old earth was most
That's about 52 thousandths, and just from the looks of it, I would say that would just about double the thickness of the sides, perhaps even a little more than double. So I'm going to go measure the thickness of the sides, which I have not done yet. I'm assuming they're probably in the 40 to 50 thousandths range, and I figure I want to make these about the same, and that'll double the thickness then. Well, the sides measured just a little thicker than I thought they were, but not much. So they're in the 50 to 60 thousandths range. These are at 52, so that's just about right. That's fine. There's no black and white measurement that absolutely works. This will just approximately double the thickness of the sides as it is right now. So the other reason I want this really thin, and perhaps might still go thinner, is that I want it to be able to bend really easy. I don't want to have to be fighting it to get it to bend all the curves. So I'm going to leave it at this for now. If I have to go thinner, I will.
To me, he lived on Current River at the mouth of Blue Springs, and at night the hills echoed as the old fiddle would ring. Grandpa,
Just going to clean the fuzzies off of this. You may have saw in the video where I put a little piece of plywood in there to make it a zero kerf. You know, I thought that might help with these fuzzies. Didn't really help much, to be honest. The coarse blade that's in the saw just pulls fibers out of the spruce, but it's not too hard to knock them off. You just take a little scraper like this using the X-Acto knife, and it knocks them off pretty good. So you can see a before there with all the fuzzies on it, and then the after where they're pretty clean. Maybe a few little fuzzies left, but nothing, no big deal. So anyway, a little bit of cleaning to do before I can start any kind of installation. And I'm not going to bore you with all this, but that's just part of making an instrument, or part of repairing an instrument in this case. I've cleaned up some of the lining here, and I've already fit a piece into this area because it's an area that's open and I can get to, and it looks perfect. You know, I have seen it both ways. I've seen it where the kerf is just square on both edges, but I've also seen it where the kerf on the inside is beveled. So I'm just going to bevel this because it's a little more work, but it just makes a nicer job in my opinion. So there you go. It's all beveled. It fits in there pretty well. Now we just need a way to glue it and clamp it. And I think I'm just going to use the clothespin technique. It works pretty well. I've got a lot of clothespins, and I think it'll be just fine for this.
Fiddle played sweet melodies. He played it from his heart for my grandma and me.
So I've got a lot more of that to do, and I'll show you the next step after we get past all that. Well, there's what she looks like with the top lining all glued in place. Gives it a nice, you know, thick place to glue the top on. Now the trick is doing the same thing to the bottom edge. It's a lot more difficult because I don't have clamps that are going to reach down in there very well. So I'm just trying to decide how I'm going to do it. And I'm not sure just how I'm going to do that yet. I mean, you could do a little bit at a time, of course, and take 2 weeks to do it, but I would really like to be able to get it done fairly quickly, get it all done fairly fast, but I don't know of a good way to clamp it. At least not yet. I'll give it a little thought, show you what I come up with. I have cleaned the joints on all of this, all the way around on the inside, on the bottom, because there was a lot of glue just spread everywhere. I've cleaned all that up. I've cut this piece to fit in between this little block and this block, and so if I've got it length right, it'll actually force itself into place. And I'm going to use that as part of the clamp, but I'm going to see what else I can come up with once I get it in there. Honestly, this is just kind of a trial and error, and I really don't know where it's going to go yet. One thing I hadn't thought of is that I need to get the glue down on the bottom there, so I guess on this one I'm going to be putting bead of glue right in the joint. I hadn't thought of that until it was already in there. I want it to be glued to the back as well. So now it's got plenty of glue, and I thought I had it plenty long to squeeze itself in there, but it's not quite as long as I thought it was, so there's still a tiny, tiny gap. What I might be able to do is put a wedge in on the end to tighten it up and make it force it in there tight. That seems to kind of work a little bit. But still in all, it's not exactly what I want. Well, that's what I came up with on this one. It works. I put a big thick piece of leather all the way around this outside edge so that the clamp on the outside is just clamping leather. On the inside, it's clamping on that little tiny piece, and more than enough force on that, I can tell you, because those are pretty strong clamps. But, you know, that's about as far as I can go until I figure out a different method, if I can figure out something else. Otherwise, I'll just have to do one piece at a time. Well, my friends, the dilemma of the few spring clamps has been solved. I got a whole bunch more. Well, I got 8 more, let's put it that way. And you know, the fact that it's late October, almost Halloween, I decided to go to that really spooky tool place. You know, that one they call Horrible Fright. Anyway, that's where I got them. Horrible Fright. They sell everything. I'll tell you what, these things are really strong. They're stronger than you might think. And I do think they're barely long enough to reach down there, but they're just long enough. Now they have a rubber pad on here too, which is kind of nice, you know. But if that gets in the way, I might take that off and just use the steel. I don't know. But here we go. Let's see if we can go further here.